Hey everybody, welcome back to the program. Today we're doing another episode of Versus. This is where I look at two versions of the same record made in different countries, examine the differences and similarities in order to figure out which one I think is the better version. And this time around we're tackling the Beatles' second studio album with the Beatles, originally released on the 22nd of November 1963. This is UK versus USA. Now before I get into the video, I want to say about today's sponsor, and that is Shady Mild Bourbon out of Kentucky. They offer two varieties, one with 21% wheat mash and my personal favorite, 21% rye mash. Right now they're running a special offer. If you buy two of their bottles, they'll send you a free t-shirt. Details are below. Thank you to Shady Mild. The album was recorded over 7 discontinuous sessions beginning in July of 1963 and wrapping up in late October the same year. Out of the 14 tracks on the album, 6 are covers, 7 are Lennon and McCartney originals, and 1 is the first appearance of a George Harrison original on a Beatles album, the song Don't Bother Me. These sessions also produced the tracks I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy, which were eventually released as a single on the 29th of November, a week after the release of With the Beatles. Capitol Records in Canada released the UK album. This made it the first Beatles record released in North America when it came out on the 25th of November 1963. However, Capitol Records in the United States were dragging their feet when it came to releasing Beatles music. Under the direction of Dave Dexter Jr., Capitol Records passed on releasing the first 4 Beatles singles. It wasn't until their parent company EMI basically ordered them to start releasing Beatles music in the US did Capitol start to work on their own version of With the Beatles. Now, the reason Capitol didn't start with Please Please Me is that technically VJ Records held the rights to distribute that album in the United States, at least for the time being. Now, getting back to With the Beatles, Capitol Records ended up customizing the UK album to better fit the US market in their eyes. This was done primarily because of 2 reasons. One was because it was expected to have at least one hit single to sell albums in the US, but this was not something done in the UK as it was generally seen as double dipping. Albums in the UK generally did not feature singles that were already released as it was seen as 2 separate things. For example, the hit single I Want to Hold Your Hand wasn't issued on the LP format in the UK until the Beatles compilation was released in December of 1966. The other reason Capitol Records rearranged Beatles albums was because of money. The way songwriting royalties were handled in the UK meant that each song represented a percentage of the total royalty paid. It was one set price for the whole record, and out of 14 tracks, one song would be 1/14 of the total. In the US, each song had a set cost, so the more songs, the more money per record had to be paid out. Because of this difference, it was common in the 60s for albums in America to have 12 tracks and records in the UK and basically the rest of the world to have 14. Capitol Records released Meet the Beatles on the 20th of January. 2 weeks later, it debuted at the 92nd spot on the Billboard chart, and by the 15th, it was at number 1, which it held for 11 weeks. All right, so real quick, I just want to touch on that this copy of With the Beatles is from the 2014 mono box set, and this is my original 1964 pressing of Meet the Beatles. Now, let's start with the UK release here. I love the minimalist design. I like how this is all in lowercase. It's very artistic to me. Like, this is like the beginning of rock pop albums becoming, works of art, or at least like really well thought out design versus just, putting a photo of the person and some text, you know what I mean? Like, this is like moving towards the more modern idea of what an album cover is. Like, I just love this photo by Robert Freeman. Just iconic to me. This is like, as much as Please Please Me is an iconic album cover, I think this is more iconic. It's like really in my mind, like the first iconic Beatles album cover with the Beatles. So getting to the US version, they were very smart to keep a lot of the same elements, especially the Robert Freeman photo here. Overall, this packaging was designed by George Osaki, along with the marketing team. One thing I question is this statement here, the first album by English phenomenal pop combo. I mean, really, that's a false statement. I mean, it's not even the first Beatles album in North America. Canada holds that, and honestly, the VJ release introducing the Beatles, it would actually beat this album by 10 days. It's really only the first Beatles album on Capitol Records in the United States, but I'm getting way into the weeds there. The only other thing I find interesting is the use of color. Like, I don't so much mind the blue added to this black and white photo here, but I don't really understand the blue and the brown here choice. Like, that just doesn't quite make sense to me. I know this this actual text can vary between like an olive green all the way down to like a more tan color. I do like the overall feeling of this text. It feels very like 60s pop art. It has like a real punchy feel. I do like that. Now, the back of the UK cover, you have this really lengthy, informative track-by-track breakdown by Tony Barrow, which is really, really excellent. And it just kind of gives you a nice introduction to each song. Get some credits over there. Now, the back of the US release, I like the inclusion of this extra photo with the captions, which really helps to introduce you to the band. I like the idea that they changed it to Meet the Beatles. And this right here is a really nice like paragraph just talking about how like popular they are. So it really kind of sets the stage. It also hints at their upcoming performance on the Ed Sullivan Show, as well as their yet to be titled feature film debut, which is really cool. So it really does a good job hyping you up to this band, getting to know them. So I'm trying to like imagine myself as a teenager in 1964, just heard about the Beatles. Like, this is a really cool introduction. I thought they did a really good job here. But that being said, overall, this round goes to the UK cover because it's overall a more timeless design. It's cleaner. It just looks better. And I think these days, this written piece here by Tony is just much more informative. So, and I just like this design as well. It's very clean, sleek. It really kind of goes well with the very high contrast black and white photo here with the turtlenecks. Like, it all really works really well. All right, moving on to the music. Capitol Records removed 5 of the 6 cover songs from the UK release, leaving only Till There Was You. And then for the first 3 tracks of Meet the Beatles, they added the UK single I Want to Hold Your Hand and its B-side This Boy. And lastly, they added the song I Saw Her Standing There from the album Please Please Me. The rest of the songs follow the UK track order, obviously skipping over the removed cover songs. It's speculated that Capitol removed so many of the cover songs because they thought that the US audience wouldn't be interested in hearing a British band cover older American songs, and they wanted to showcase the writing talent of the Beatles. Now, whether this is true or not doesn't take away from the fact that by removing the cover songs makes this a more pure Beatles experience. However, does that make it a better album? And that's where this gets really hard for me, because on the one hand, having I Want to Hold Your Hand and This Boy on an album is great, and it makes sense to include I Saw Her Standing There from Please Please Me, as that's one of the standout tracks from that album. However, the cover songs that were removed are really good as well. I mean, the Beatles really knew how to take a song and make it their own, and the way With the Beatles ends on Money is superb. It's such a great cover, and it ends the album with a ton of energy, much more so than Not a Second on the US version. And because of all of that, this round goes to the UK release. So, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the UK version is the better overall album. From the cover design to the music, especially for this era of Beatles, it really is a fantastic record. However, Meet the Beatles is still a great album and worth having in your collection. As far as Capitol butchering Beatles albums, they did a pretty good job with their first outing. It's really not that bad. It's just a little short. Now, if you're looking to pick up a copy, it's pretty easy since the UK version is standard all over the world. However, it's interesting to note that in Australia, they got a different photo for the cover, which apparently the Beatles didn't like at all. As for the US version, it's also pretty easy to find and relatively cheap to pick up since it was reissued so many times over the years. As far as mono or stereo, I highly recommend the mono versions for both albums. It's what the band intended, and the stereo mix just feels very rough to modern ears. Alright everybody, that will do it for today. Let me know your preferred version of this album. Do you like one over the other, or do both of them hold a special place in your collection? Until then, I want to thank you all so much for watching, but I especially want to thank my members over on Patreon. I'm your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side.